Well, good afternoon, everybody. Delighted to welcome everyone to this meeting of the RSA's Cohesion Policy Research Network. My name is Alan Kinder. I'm Chief Executive here at the RSA. And it's a great pleasure to join you all this afternoon. I'm going to do the housekeeping first, if I may. So this webinar is being recorded. It's going to be made available on the CPNet Research Network page. Please put any questions that you have in the Q&A box, and we would encourage you to use the hashtag #RSAwebinar if you want to tweet about the event as it unfolds. So as I say, I'm delighted to join you here. Looking at the web page as I did this morning on the RSA website, it's really clear to me that not only is this one of the longest running RSA networks, it also is one of the most productive, I think, in terms of outputs. And these have included over time journal articles, special issues, conference special sessions, and also direct engagement with some very high-level policymakers across the European Union. So congratulations on the work that you've done so far as a network. Just a few words from me by way of introduction more broadly to the RSA, if I may. I'm not going to make the assumption that everybody joining today, or indeed everyone watching online, knows about the RSA. So I'll just make some brief comments about the association. So if you're not familiar with the RSA, we're a charity, but we are registered in the UK, but very much support a global community of regional and urban researchers and policymakers and practitioners. We're also a membership organisation, and we have a presence in over 80 countries around the world. If for some reason you're not a member of the RSA, I absolutely would encourage you to join today. I like to think about the association as providing a kind of professional infrastructure for the regional and urban research community. What I mean by that is that we do a number of practical and professional things that support the cause. So publishing a suite of 6 academic journals and 2 academic book series, for example, by running a very vigorous programme of conferences and events, and also by advocating for the importance of regional and urban research. To give an example, we recently, following the European parliamentary elections, wrote on behalf of our members to Ursula von der Leyen to express our support for a really robust cohesion policy in the future and for work of the #Cohesion Alliance. And of course, importantly, we also support research and researchers by awarding grants, such as the one that supports this network. And we're really proud and excited to do that. Speaking as a relatively new chief executive for the association, it does seem to me that research networks, because they operate across territories, whether they're RSA territorial structures or indeed international boundaries, they're a really fabulous way of connecting researchers from diverse perspectives, but with a shared focus. And I know from talking with quite a few members of our community that these networks are also often ways in to the field of regional studies, and they clearly support our aim of producing research today, policy tomorrow. So I wish you all a really productive meeting. It's nice to meet some of you, albeit virtually. And I'd finish by saying that if you have thoughts and ideas for ways in which the RSA could better support its research networks in the future, then please do share those with us, either with your research network organisers or indeed by contacting us directly. And I hope you have a fantastic meeting. Thanks for inviting me along, and good luck.
Well, thank you, Alan, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me well from home. My name is Laura Polverari. I'm a member, of course, of the CPNet network, and I've been in the past one of the coordinators. And I'm really delighted to be chairing today's meeting, which was organized primarily by Professor Silvia Grandi under the aegis of the CPNet network on cohesion policy. As the title of today's seminar suggests, Past and Futures of Sustainable Development, Environment, and Green Economy in EU Cohesion Policy, This webinar today aims to discuss the relationship between EU cohesion policy, of course, but also the environment and sustainable development and the SDGs and the green economy, a relationship which is, of course, crucial, but also complex to implement in practice. Now, today we have three presentations. First of all, by Professor Silvia Grandi, who's a professor at the University of Bologna, and Silvia will talk to us about exactly sustainability and environment in cohesion policy, a geohistorical regulatory perspective. This presentation will be followed by Iraklis Stamos, who's a scientific project manager at the JRC in Seville, and Iraklis will talk about the monitoring and the implementation of the SDGs at a regional level in Europe. And then the third and last presentation will be by Mara Cossu, who works as a senior policy officer at the Italian Ministry of the Environment and Energy Security. And Dr. Cossu will talk about policy coherence and how to operationalize cohesion policy, SDGs, the SDGs in cohesion policy, and particularly focusing on the Italian experience. So thank you to all our three speakers. After the three presentations, we will have a discussion, first of all, with some discussants, particularly Sonia de Gregorio Hurtado from the Polytechnic University of Madrid, Sébastien Bourdin from the Normandie Business School in France, Maria Prezioso, who's a professor at the University of Rome Tor Vergata in Italy, of course, Paola Tulpo, and hello, everyone, by the way, from the University of Lapland in Finland. And then last but not least, Federico Martellozzo, who's an associate professor at the University of Florence here in Italy. As you can see, the range of speakers really covers even geographically the whole of Europe, which gives an indication of how widespread the CPNet network is and how really not only multidisciplinary, but also cross-national how our work as a network is. There will be room, of course, for discussion and for asking questions to our speakers and our discussants. So if people at home have questions, please do not hesitate to write them down in the Q&A box at any time, and we'll follow them up, of course. The meeting will conclude with some wrapping up by Professor Ida Musiałkowska and Professor De Gregorio Hurtado at the end. And yes, I think without further ado, we can start with the first presentation. So I hand over the floor to Silvia. Silvia, the floor is yours. Thank you.
So thank you very much. So I'm going to share my presentation today, which is, let me just have a second. Okay, good. So hopefully you can see it. And so basically this is dedicated to the relationship between environmental and sustainability policy, sustainable development policy within cohesion policies. And this is also, I think, later on, Ida and Sonia will give more into this. But this chapter was written and within the EU cohesion policy multidisciplinary approach within the CPNet book by Elgar, Edward Elgar. And today, of course, we started with this, but I also built up a little bit of novelty, so I'm sharing with this. Where all this started, for those of you know, I both worked within environment and sustainable policy and cohesion policy. So these convergences and in interaction between the two were kind of intriguing for me, and I started to ask when these two actually started to converge eventually. Are they? How complex is this relationship? Why and why not it happens, and how it happens, and what are the trends? So these were my thinking. But first, to start with the reasoning, I took two main points of references. One was actually a book which is unfortunately only in Italian, and I was looking whether there was kind of books or at least articles written by Adalberto Vallega on this topic in English, but it was not. So I was like, oh my, oh my, we should do something about that. Because in 1995, in a book which was called The Region as a Sustainable Territorial System, say it in English, but it actually provided a whole comprehensive logic within the relationship between sustainable development, the paradigm of a system theory, which was based on the work in the Club of Rome and the limit of growth and so on, and sustainable development political paradigm. And this is a very interesting framework to probably rediscover in current situations and also in policy making. This was my thought. The other one, of course, is the Agenda 2030 and the structure and the 5P models, the 17 SDGs and 165 targets, and that everybody knows about it. But in terms of methodology, this was a kind of a thorough reading of regulations, linking with reading legal documents, institutional documents, reports. Lately, probably the cohesion, that's the cohesion reports, and the voluntary national review done by the European Union 2023, which was very updated, and all these elements start to try to give a kind of result of convergence. Of course, as I said, being also active into policy making, I could also use the ethnographic observation, and I also use interviews and statements of opinion leaders collected in various research projects, including the one dedicated to territorial impact assessment on cohesion policies within the PRIN 2015, where Professor Prezioso was the principal investigators. So just for those that are not familiar with environmental policies and sustainable policies, a couple of milestones in terms of timing, because this geohistorical, I used the timeline to actually understand what are the relationships. So basically environment was not there in 1957 when the Treaty of Rome was there. So there was only general references on working and condition and so on, which can actually more target the social and economic aspect of the European Union policies and within the sustainability paradigm. Was in 1972, the Paris Summit. We know that in the same year, the UN Stockholm Conference was there. So when the environment started to be included in the political discourse and the policies. And but very quickly, in 1973, the European Council adopted the first environmental action plan. So a quick reaction at that time. We have to also remember that this was the time of the crisis, the first oil crisis, and everybody and politically was very publicly engaged topic then. More substantial, 1992, the same year of the United Nations Summit in Rio, so the Health Summit, was actually included in the Treaty of Maastricht the role of environmental protection, and which has to be integrated in the definition of an implementation and other community policies. So rather than a single policy, it was actually permeating, so horizontally, or an horizontal topic rather than a sector, let's say. Policies. In 1997, the Treaty of Amsterdam also included the concept of sustainable development among the general principle of the treaty, among with like Polverari principles, subsidiarity, and so on. So the Commission communication into 2020 actually is not a Commission communication itself. It's actually more a staff working document. It talks about the whole of government approach. So this is in the language of the Commission, the idea of keeping these horizontal and not too, especially sustainable development, not vertical. But the strategies then in the current century have characterized the inclusion of the environmental and the sustainable development approach more or less a sustainable Lisbon strategy, which everybody knows I was focused on technology and knowledge, job and growth, getting back to the social aspect, Europe 2020 with sustainable, smart, and inclusive. So sustainability becomes at the same level of the other policies. The EU Green Deal started to actually keep high pace of the sustainability, the environmental sustainability, with a strong considering a win-win element, to consider a win-win situation. So it was not only on protection, so a burden, but actually a win-win, a competitive elements. And now, of course, and the national, in the meantime, we had the next generation EU with the twin transition, but now it's a really cool period to wait for what the new von der Leyen strategy will be. The political guidelines issued in July highlights the high role and the relaunch of the industrial policy, the defense. So, but still, the cohesion was there. The environment probably has been highly worked on. We will see how it happens. So this is, but I don't go to, I went already quite a lot through this, at least from the first part. And this is basically a summary picture that try to interlink the period of times that have been connected with the green part, which is more or less more environment and things, and the yellow one was on the cohesion. And as you see, these are the cohesion periods. These are the environmental programs. And these are the main adoption, but generally on sustainable development aspect. So some trends to conclude for this, to give food for thought for the discussion. There is a paralleling and sometimes intervening at the various space between the two policy, the 2 and 3 policy, let's say. Common objectives, target-oriented and participation methodological approach, both in sustainable development and cohesion. So there is a high potential to converge. There is still an ambiguity in sustainable development. So sometimes people thinking still with an ecocentric perspective, otherwise on trade-off. Difficult to keep people, planet, and prosperity and highly integrated, holistic approach at the same level. From CP, the cohesion policy programming period 93-94, the environment was thought really, but more like a burden. So the cohesion policy, a way to compensate lagging region for to ensure compliance, whilst later on with the green growth started to be included from cohesion policy, let's say in mainstream 2014 to 2020 was also near marking of 20%. Cohesion policy 21-27, the stronger entanglement, the new novelty is actually the EU taxonomy on sustainable finance and the do not significant harm principle, I think, and the just transition. So to operationalization. And now for the next, do we have a convergence, or we do have an ex-ante policy coherence, as I said. Generally, we do have monitoring towards the sustainable development goals, but rather not has a tool to get into or something to use in monitoring. So these are some thought, and I give back the floor to Laura. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Silvia, not only for the content of what you just illustrated, but also for keeping to time in a fantastic way, which makes the job of a chair really easy. I do not see any questions on the chat, but if there are specific questions about this presentation, please raise them now, because we have a couple of minutes that we can devote exactly to this presentation. Otherwise, I'll move on to the next presentation. And I'll remind everyone that actually you can also sort of join the conversation on Twitter with the hashtag RSA webinar and RegStud, which is the hashtag of Regional Studies, of course, Association. So since I do not see any specific questions on Silvia's presentation, let's move on then to Iraklis. And Iraklis, you talk about the monitoring and implementation of the SDGs at a regional level. So that follows on really nicely from what Silvia just illustrated. And I'm looking forward to hearing your presentation as well. Thank you. You have as well about 12, maximum 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, yeah, my job is a bit difficult to keep the time, but I already thank Silvia a lot because indeed she already sort of opened the floor for what I will say. And I will be able also to skip a couple of slides because as Silvia put it, everybody knows about the SDGs. So I don't need to talk about these high-level political goals adopted in 2015 by the UN, which are basically covering all, or maybe with a small question mark, all aspects of sustainable development. We have some thoughts on whether indeed everything is included in the framework. But in any case, as Silvia was saying, this is further sort of detailed in 169 targets and in 242 indicators with which we monitor these many dimensions of sustainable development. Now, what I will do, and I just realized I didn't introduce myself. So my name is Iraklis Stamos. I'm working for the European Commission's Joint Research Center. And what I will do within this context is tell you a little bit about the work that we are doing in regard to the localization of the SDGs at the regional level. That is ways to bring them down from the national level that are usually discussed to the local level and in particular to the regional level. And now the way that we usually work is we try to analyze what is out there on many different levels. And one of the things that we're doing is we're analyzing what is called the VLRs. Silvia mentioned the VNR, which is basically the voluntary national review of the EU done last year. We have similar efforts from many member states, from many UN countries since 2015. However, the picture on the local level is a bit different, and I'm very happy to say that we're one of the few institutions that keep very good track of how the VLR movement and trends is evolving over the years. We know where these VLRs happen, what kind of local and regional authorities are doing them, who is behind, is it like a city, what type of authorities publish these reviews. We know, for instance, that the majority is led by cities and municipalities all over the world, and we have also around 1/3 done in Europe. And then when we focus within Europe, we can again say and see what type of authorities issue these documents, these voluntary reviews on sustainability, when they were published, which countries published them, in what language, what type of information they include, are they quanti, quali, or both, and so on. So we work a lot on this aspect because we feel that although it's the 2024, the knowledge is still young in regard to how we localize the Sustainable Development Goals. And then we know that there is a lot of feedback to be given to the national level because the SDGs are to be achieved only if the different governments are brought together. And the way that we work is usually with like tools, models, data, trying to respect the principles that are being set by the framework, by the Agenda 2030 itself. So now I will dive a little bit on more specific things that we are doing, because basically we're working on three sort of areas. The one being on the monitoring of the SDGs, so indicators and analysis of indicators to monitor sustainable development at regional level. On the implementation of the SDGs, that is actions, strategies, plans, programs, work, whatever that is that cities, regions, and local governments are putting in place in order to achieve them. And then we try to use this analysis to come up with sort of quantitative ways of how the SDGs are interlinked to one another, and if so, why. So if I just quickly start on the monitoring part, basically what we do is we try to collect different indicators that are fit for purpose for monitoring the SDGs. We try to compile the database. We are based on certain principles on what kind of data and indicators we can include in our analysis. And basically, we come up with either bigger efforts or smaller efforts where we engage with the SDG practitioners. For example, we just finalized a project which was called Regions 2030 with the participation of 10 European pilot regions with whom we co-developed a set of indicators to monitor the SDGs. So we started with some ideas that we had, which you see on the upper part. Then we had the input of the regions who are actually monitoring the SDGs on the ground. We had this evidence, we incorporated, and then based on several iterations and integrations of the different indicator sets, we came up with a final proposal of 116 indicators that we see are fit for purpose to monitor the SDGs at the regional level. And all of this work, we basically summarize in a report, which usually looks like that. There is a detailed explanation of each and every indicator that we feel is relevant to be monitored in order to, again, localize the SDGs. We suggest different data sources. We explain what is the relevance of this indicator for the European context, for the regional context, and so on. And we, again, summarize all of this work that we are doing on reports. Now, based on this analysis that we are doing, we are also able to say, because we're often faced with the questions, regions come to us and say, you know, we want to monitor the SDGs, we want to monitor the sustainable development, but we don't know where to start from. So how many indicators should we use? And then our analysis allows us to say that, you know, based on the authority that raises this question, the government type that also raises this question, we have different kind of answer. So we can give a different range based on what peers are doing, again, based on the analysis of these voluntary local reviews. And then we can also say this is how the distribution of this final number of indicators could be per SDG. And we also see the preference of, for instance, regions monitoring certain SDGs over others, and so on. However, one of the, let's say, main motivations of the analysis that we're doing is to go from what Silvia was mentioning before as this voluntary review of the EU, which we have this sort of graph on the left where we see the progress of the EU as a whole on the SDGs, where you see, for instance, on the bottom left, some SDGs we have a moderate movement away from the progress that we wish as Europeans. But in any case, all these SDGs are represented with one dot. And then Eurostat publishes once a year its annual report on the SDGs, and we are able to see how this one dot is being translated in the 27 member states, which is great to have, but still we are missing something, and this is where we come, where we are trying to translate the 27 dots in the 242 NUTS2 regions of Europe. So basically, we analyze the data that come from all respective regions in Europe, and we try to visualize them per SDG. How do we do that? Basically, we work on two different things. The one is called status, which is basically says how regions are performing on a certain SDG, and then progress, which means how regions are progressing in regard to a certain SDG. By SDG here, I mean an index that we are building based on indicators that are suggested from, again, this practice that we have with the pilot region. So we use all of the work that we do in different projects, which culminates in a set of indicators, and then we analyze these indicators. We build indexes per SDG, and basically what you see is this, which is this is a quadrant analysis. The way you read this graph is basically in quarters. On the top right, you see the NUTS2 regions in Europe, which are both performing above the European average and towards the European target for, in this case, goal 8, which is decent employment and economic growth. And then on the, for instance, bottom left, you see regions which are both below the European average, but also progressing away from the goal. So this is a very interesting analysis for us because we are able to spot the regions on which we can potentially or should potentially work on. For instance, on the top left, we see some of the regions that are above the European average, which, however, are shifting, are diverting away from the progress of the goal. While, for instance, on the bottom right, we see regions which are on the right direction, still below the EU average. So depends on where we want to concentrate and what type of contribution or input we want to give to these regions, be it through the cohesion policy or other funds and initiatives. very quickly, and I think I still have like 5 minutes, right, Laura? Tops. Yeah, very quickly. We are sort of combining this work on the monitoring, which is rather static, I would say, because then we sort of visualize the 240 regions per SDG. We know where they are, what they do. But at the same time, we're working a lot on trying to understand what they could do in order to achieve the SDGs, in order to progress based on their placement on this visualization map. So what we do again here is we dive again into these reports published, these voluntary local reviews published by cities and regions. For now, this is obviously an ongoing process because there are a lot of these documents and they're quite huge and very diverse from one another. And we're trying to extract all of the actions that they describe in there that they are taking in order to address an SDG. For example, these VLRs usually are like per SDG. You start for SDG 1, no poverty. There is usually an indicator which says how many people in the region or city are living below the poverty threshold. And then each of the city or region who is publishing this VLR usually mentions 1 or 2 or 3 or how many actions in order to improve this indicator that we're seeing. And they say, for example, we do free meals, we do minimum income initiatives, and so on. So we take all of this information, we sort of log them in, we register in a database, and we keep track of the type of action that these actions belong to, be it an initiative, a program, a plan, a project, a development, a strategy, whatever that is, so that we know what we are looking at, what type of action we're looking at. We know the categories, so the content of this action, and we assign it based on a list that we have made, which is rather big. And then on top of that, which for us is very, very important, we log in the means of implementation to bring this action into reality. For instance, looking at this graph that you have in front of you, I can tell you that from the analysis that we have done so far, which is a little bit biased because it's just a sample, we know that the SDGs are achieved sort of predominantly through legislation and infrastructure. And this is a very strong message to go back to both the Commission services and say that possibly we need to make more funds available for cities and regions to achieve the SDGs. But also, at the same time, we need to work on the legislative part, directions, regulations at European level, at regional level, at local level, and so on. So we try to make sense out of the wealth of information that we have on the implementation of the SDGs. Finally, and I just close with that, we do a lot of work on the interlinkages. We sort of bring together different methods that we can use, both quanti, quali, simulation, data, statistics, everything that is in there. And based on the data collection that we do, we come together, well, I'll skip these technical slides, but maybe this is more interesting. We come together with some sort of Persian carpets, which in that sense are correlation matrices that correlate the SDGs to one another, which basically on the left, you see it at an SDG level, the blue squares, meaning that the more we strive for one SDG, the better we also achieve another one, which is a very interesting thing to keep an eye on. Well, I would even say that the most interesting thing to keep an eye on are the red boxes, which means that the more we go towards direction, we might shift away from the direction of another goal. And we also do this at the target level. So on a matrix of 169 targets by 669 targets. With this, I close, and I hope that I stayed within the limit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Iraklis. You did stick to the time assigned and you were perfect as well and very clear. So basically what you highlighted is that not only, as we know, cohesion policy entails a trade-off between efficiency and equity, but there is clearly also a trade-off between equity, efficiency, and environmental sustainability, and to an extent also between the pursuit of different sustainability goals, as you just said. So pursuing some SDGs can go counter other SDGs as well. And this is a very difficult trade-off actually to add on top of the ones that we have already. So that's really interesting. Once again, to those who are listening from home, if you have questions, please do write them down in our Q&A box because we will have a chance to answer those later. Now, without further ado, I would like then to hear Mara Cossu. So Mara, please, the floor is yours. And basically, you continue giving us some concrete examples from what you're doing in Italy effectively. So thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lara, and thank you all for having this space for discussion, which is always useful to us, which are, well, we try to do something to put something on the ground. So without further ado, I'll try sharing my screen. Hope it worked in full mode. Okay, so I will present to you the Italian experience in trying to combine sustainable development governance, particularly within the National Strategy for Sustainable Development process, which is the coordination mechanism that Italian government put in place to address the 2030 Agenda Vision Principle and SDGs. With the cohesion policy. Two entry points to us. The first one is the structure that the NSDS, the national strategy, has, particularly dealing with the fact that our strategic choices and objectives are not directly linked to one SDG or to one target, which is quite more complicated in a just complicated framework per se. So we have integrated choices, and we need, coming to what Iraklis was saying, we need different measures to intercept different dimensions to monitor in each of those strategic choices. We also have another peculiarity, which is dealing with what we call the sixth area. We have the national strategy is based on the 5 Ps, as Silvia was saying, and then we have another area called vectors for sustainability. And those are defined as the main enabling conditions to allow sustainable development strategic framework work within the policy cycle. So also go into the cohesion policy. The other main element I have to introduce is about territories. The Italian law foresees that the National Strategy for Sustainable Development has to be declined at regional, provincial, and then local level by the regions themselves. So they call them to adopt their own regional strategy for sustainable development. And within this law, which comes from the 2010, so it's quite before the 2030 agenda, we based for delivering a multi-level governance system to work within and also to deal with the cohesion policy. The second entry point is about policy coherence for sustainable development. The new strategy for sustainable development, which was adopted last year in 2023, puts the policy coherence for sustainable development as one of the main enabling conditions, one of the 3 enabling conditions of the strategy, which deals with not only a label or a generic approach, but deals with the operationalization of the OECD recommendations on PCSD and a territorial operationalization. I'm sorry, that's quite difficult for me, which means put in place institutional mechanisms while creating a trusted visional framework, so make the NSDS and the regional strategies for sustainable development to be set at strategic framework level in their own administrations, and then dealing with policy and financing impact. So the National Plan for Policy Coherence for Sustainable Development was released together with the OECD and funded by the DG Reform of the European Commission in 2022, and it was annexed to the national strategy adopted in 2023. And it defines the governance system and the mechanisms for delivering PCSD tools, and it also defines some tools also dealing with the cohesion policy to be further delivered and implemented at also at territorial level. We are now going through a new TSI, a new support instruments from the DG Reform dedicated to the regions, Italian regions, in a multi-country project, which is dealing with the localization of the PCSD approach, also in terms of cohesion policy and strategic programming for sustainable development. And it is starting in next October 2024. So what happens is that just to have a quick look in this very complicated scheme, just to see that the territorial relationship mechanism. So we have a working group with the regions and autonomous provinces, and another one with metropolitan cities that is dialoguing directly with the national level. And we work together within this stream, also in terms of cohesion policy. We started with a position paper to prepare the new partnership agreement for 21-27, which deals to what I will introduce you in a minute. The PCSD approach comes all over the policy cycle to position the NSDS tools and mechanisms all over the policy cycle itself. So both in terms of planning, implementation, assessment, monitoring, and engagement of public, local entities and stakeholder engagement, which means deal with also, as Iraklis was saying, monitoring. So just taking note of what is over us. So 2030 agenda mechanism and YIC indicators, European and JSC work on the item, just fixing to the fact that we have defined within the plan for cohesion policy, for policy coherence for sustainable development, a 3-level monitoring scheme. The first one is dealing with we call context indicators. The second is about programs, so performance indicators, dealing with the cohesion policy program indicators. And the last one is about tracking process to see how it deals with the vectors for sustainability. So the enabling conditions, which has to be traced and traced in a different way, in our opinion. So just look into these 55 primary indicators because they are the set defined with regions and metropolitan cities to also monitor their level of achievement of the national strategy objectives. So this is a shared core set dealing with the European, national and international level because it is within the YIC framework. We have a very active working table on indicators at national level dealing with the regions. So this is the core set to allow localizing and monitoring at different level of territorial system, the achievement of the SDGs and of the national strategy objectives. It all comes and goes back to territories in our experience. We have strategic frameworks adopted, 18 at regional level out of 21 and 10 out of 14 at metropolitan level. And we had in 2022, also coming back to what Iraklis was saying, to an integrated VNR, which means that we didn't have separated VLRs, one for each administration, but we had just one, the national and territorial VNR, which included 12 VLRs representing 18 administrations working together, which is one of the main aims that we have, working together on common challenges and dealing with how to represent this collaborative approach into also strategic and public documents. This approach is also been put into the work that 2 regions out of 10 selected by the JSC for the regions 2030 put in their own reports. Puglia and Piemonte participated to the pilot action from the JSC, and they represented how the work that we are doing together with all the regions can benefit from all the advancement from the European level and from GSC to be brought back at a national and to the all regions in Italian system within the mechanisms that we have put in place with the PCSD. Going further to the topic, so cohesion policy. Within this framework and these mechanisms, they are trying to very quickly present to you. Cohesion policy has been and continues to be our first field of trial because the setting already set up a mechanism for assessment and monitoring of programming of operational programs for cohesion policies, the best environment to try to see if and how our means and tools can be further adjusted and implemented out of programs funded by cohesion policy. So 7 steps. The first one is about setting the methodological framework, which means dialoguing with the Department for Cohesion Policy and all the actors involved in their system of exchanges and relations with the cohesion policy community to see how we can deal with our different languages, most of all, and primarily, and then how to put up a common path to achieve common goals. Then to define interactions among the cohesion policy, particularly the partnership agreement for Italy in 21-27, but we started with the former Network for Environmental Authorities in 14-20 program to start working on interactions, profiling matrices, mapping the interlinkages also among actors, not only among strategic documents, which is quite peculiar and relevant to bridge different competencies and different sectors of the same administrations, and then see how and if we can drive a better understanding from the different actors and to help them collaborating, shifting also to a model instead to a matrix. Very quickly, the system of the indicators set for the National Strategy for Sustainable Development directly fits within the methodological framework that Italy developed in 2012 for strategic environmental assessment monitoring, which means that the national strategy gives the overall framework of sustainability objectives and context indicators. Then you have the program, and you have to see if and how this program or this partnership agreement can qualify and contribute to the achievement of the SDGs and other national strategies. And it has to do that within the assessment and monitoring tools that have been designed for monitoring those instruments. So particularly, we're talking about cohesion policy assessment plans and strategic environmental assessment monitoring reports for each program. So we started from mapping the interactions. This is a Power BI, which is available on the ministry website on the page for the National Strategy for Sustainable Development. We have the link. I will put the link in chat if you want. Just mapping the interlinkages among 2030 Agenda, National Strategy for Sustainable Development, Partnership Agreement 21-27, and National Resilience Plan and Rescue Plan. Then we passed from the mapping to the interlinkages among objectives, program contents, and indicators, which means put in relationship also our context for sustainability context indicators and program indicators attached to each interventions from the partnership agreement, and also go into funding, because you can, through the intervention number, you can link to the funding so that you can go back to see if and how we are spending resources for achieving the single or a sort of list of objectives. And then we went through some laboratories jointly conducted and driven by the Department for Cohesion Policy and the National Assessment System for the Cohesion Policy and the Ministry for Environment. So what Silvia was saying before about this convergence among different communities has been at the core of our commitment to bring out a common language, to better understand each other, and to share tools and mechanisms for interactions also in terms of stakeholder engagement. So this was a very huge work during 6 months, more or less, where we presented a lot of different methods that can be used and tools that have been developed by regions, by territories, by national administrations, so different experience on the ground to find a common path to go through and to better understand if and how we can assess the contribution of the partnership agreement in Italy to the sustainability objectives. This is the last step about a model that we developed with the Department of Cohesion Policy for assessing the contribution of the partnership agreement to each of the objectives of the National Strategy for Sustainable Development. It has been, we have just written down a contribution for the International Sustainable Development Conference this year, so it's about to be published, and we are going on this flow of work. We have to, it has been set at national level, so we have the national framework, and we are going to go through with the regions, with the working table we have with them, to see if and how we can adjust at the regional level to fit to regional programs. So it's a working flow which is going on, and it continues, and it's the core of the implementation of the National Strategy for Sustainable Development in Italy. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mara, for the excellent presentation. You presented quite a lot of work in a very compressed time scale. So well done. And thanks for the clarity, of course. Now, we have a little bit of time before we move on to the sort of discussants for questions. So again, I invite everyone amongst our group of people who are following this seminar online to write down their questions. We have one, and let's start with the one that has already been written down, and it's particularly for Iraklis, and it's about whether you use AI at all for your work, particularly with regards to mapping the interactions between the different SDGs. But again, I invite also Mara and Silvia to talk about AI insofar as it might be relevant to their work as well. Iraklis, I turn to you.
A very pertinent question indeed. Well, the short answer is no, and the long answer is no, because we are not yet sure on or very confident on the results that we will be getting from AI. That is, we do it conservatively, which takes more time and requires more resources. We really study the thing before doing it, and then in terms of methods and calculation methods, we are still on correlation, causality sort of overlap. We do usual statistics in the beginning, and then we cross-check the findings that we have or the insights that we have from the correlation with sort of Delphi or experts that actually validate or not the results that we see from the statistics. We consider this, so this is a very relevant question, but again, so far we are not absolutely convinced about the results. This is not to say that we will not in the future. Certainly something to keep an eye on, particularly for this very complex topic. So yeah, for us it's very relevant, but we're not there yet.
Thank you. What about Italy? I mean, I'm asking both Silvia and Mara, are you thinking about using AI at all?
If I may come in, yes, of course. We started thinking about the use of AI when delivering the first mapping for the Power BI. We were working with the Department of Economics of the Vergataq, so we shared with them the opportunity to use it. But there's a lot of we still do not know on how to better use AI and which AI can better fit to our needs. So the idea is to further work on this issue by further collaborating with the academia. We have some funds on PCSD implementation plan. So this is quite part of all the, not the governance, but the tools to be further developed within the PCSD plan. And so matrices and models that can be very much benefited from the AI, and all the interlinkages also can be, as Iraklis was saying, it can really be useful, but we still do not know how. And in a public administration, it's not that easy to also perceive all the potential that it can display on our work. So now, as Iraklis was saying, we go on conservatively, but we look forward to use it quite proactively.
So just a quick method element on what I've done as a research. I mean, this one, the type of semantic analysis I've done in the regulation could have been actually used with traditional, let's say, anti-literal AI, which is something that has been in use since quite a long time in research, especially from languages and so on. But actually, probably the attitude of doing it and reading it and to be sure of still is there. So I would like to maybe test the difference between what a semantic reading would do against the one I've done. But still, I'm not against it. It's always a supportive tool, any AI. Probably, as somebody was saying, in Wikipedia was a good point to start with, but not to finish a research to our kids at school. So.
Thank you both, Mara and Silvia. So a conservative approach, but you're looking at AI for future use once it's clear what we can do with it, of course. So there are no other questions in our Q&A box. So I'll wait maybe a minute or so. But if there are no further questions, I think we can really start already with the discussants, and I go in the order of our program. So I'll ask first of all Sonia to comment on the three presentations. Sonia, you have 5 minutes, and please stick with the 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for having me as discussant in the seminar. And let me say, before giving my contribution in this regard, as one of the coordinators of the Cohesion Policy Research Network, CPNet, to thank Silvia Grandi for the organization of this seminar. And of course, to thank also the Regional Studies Association for the great support to it, and the other coordinator, Ida Musiałkowska, who is also present in this seminar. I will also start thanking Silvia, Iraklis, and Mara for the inspiring and high-level presentation, and for introducing the topics in a very straightforward manner to boost the reflection we aim to have. I would like to pose my contribution under the four of two main points, just to be brief, and of course both of them will be biased by my research field. I am an urban planner, professor of urbanism, and also the reflection that has been going on in my national framework with regard the policies related with the topic of our seminar in the last years. Departing from a word that has been very present in the presentation of Silvia, and somehow had been also implicit in the presentations by Iraklis and Mara, and this word is convergence. I will pose the question: what kind of convergence between or among the cohesion policy and the 2030 agenda? This is because, as we well know, the 2030 agenda is an instrument that has been agreed on the basis of a United Nations agreement, so integrating countries from very, very different geographic regions. And also, as we know, and that has been introduced very well by our speakers, the cohesion policy is well beyond, the objectives of cohesion policy are well beyond the objectives of most of these geographical regions, and from taking this into account, also well beyond the 2030 agenda agreements that were set in the document and also in the SDGs. So departing from this and recognizing the symbolic value, the didactic method that has been used, and also the setting of a methodological framework, I will introduce the question of how can cohesion policy objectives be driving the 2030 agenda objectives and informing them, and also what lessons learned can be transposing, and through which mechanisms from cohesion policy to the agenda 2030, so that as has been anticipated by many politicians, but also researchers, Europe can somehow show a path to other geographical regions to advance towards sustainability. And the other point, very, very briefly, this is again very biased by my own research field. I am observing, and maybe I'm mistaken, this is something I really would like to contrast with my colleagues, that in this time that has been characterized by polycrisis, recurring crisis, and a time of ecological crisis, climate emergency, social polarization, and so on. Some of us, and I think there are many scholars pointing this out, identify that cohesion policy is presenting a sort of inertia to take into account the adverse social and environmental effects of the prevailing growth model. And this is, again, being pointed out by scholars, is translating in an inertia to integrate some innovative vision that are being presented and that has been quite developed within the academic framework. For example, coming from my own field of research, our colleagues are talking about visions that are beyond sustainability to make the ecologic transition that we need, for example, through regenerative development, low growth, or even no growth visions. So the question here is how to we could introduce better these reflections in cohesion policy, at least taking them into account for the following period, to really be able to make the ecological and just transition process that is being proposed, for example, by the European Green Deal. So thanks a lot for providing me the floor to pose these questions, and I give the floor to the following discussants. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you very much, Sonia. And again, you managed to stick exactly in the 5 minutes. So, Sébastien, would you like to take over then?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for your respective presentations. Of course, it's clear that territorial cohesion and sustainable development policies play a crucial role in reducing regional disparities. And from this perspective, the book that has been recently published highlighted it very well. And I thought the presentations were well organized, and you effectively demonstrated how the SDGs should be the focus on the debate on territorial cohesion. And I would like to emphasize here the links between the European Green Deal from one hand, so the flagship response to climate and environmental challenges, and the cohesion policy. So my first question is how to ensure that all regions, including those lagging behind in terms of development or that are dependent on traditional economic sectors that are emitting a lot of carbon emissions, can benefit from the Green Deal, let's say. And what is the role, or what do you think is the role of the cohesion policy here in trying to help those lagging behind regions or those that are dependent on traditional economic sectors? And of course, what you have also highlighted, especially Silvia, is that historically cohesion and environmental policies has evolved separately. However, it seems that with the Green Deal, there is more integration of these two dimensions, and it's becoming increasingly essential, this integration of these two dimensions. And we have observed with the next generation EU recovery plan that there are many policies that has been implementing in this sense, so decarbonizing their industries, promoting green infrastructures, and so on. So, when you look at the last debate on the cohesion policy, and what Ursula von der Leyen said also as well, is that circular economy, because I work on circular economy, so I would like to ask a question on it, can be like a way or a tool, let's say, a component of the Green Deal to be sure that you are reducing the carbon emissions. And it can be also seen as a tool to achieve more an efficient cohesion, territorial cohesion. So my question is, how do you see the circular economy as a tool to reach both territorial cohesion and carbon neutrality. And finally, we are all of us convinced that we need to ensure green transition, to deploy very quickly the ecological transition. But we also know that there is a rise of the green discontent, which means that there are more and more people that are against the renewable energies, for example, the NIMBY effect. They don't want the implementation of ecological policies, and eventually there are climate skeptics. So how can we manage this? How do you think we can manage this? That's all for me.
Okay, thank you very much, Sébastien, as well. I think we have quite a lot of questions. So what I think we're going to do is maybe to allow some time to reflect on those questions. So I give the floor back to our three speakers. But before I do so, there's also a question from the audience, and particularly by Professor Nagla Fatih El Desuki. I don't know if I pronounce it correctly because I don't know this person personally. But basically, Professor El Desuki is asking, what about the extent of participation of broader society and communities in the elaboration of these policies towards the achievement of the SDGs within cohesion policy? So I think if we summarize, we have, first of all, this last question. We have questions about, generally intended, how can actually cohesion policy drive the 2030 agenda that of course, Sonia was raising. And then we have questions about the circular economy and the green discontent. So, not only who is paying the price of the green transition, let's say, but also how to deal politically with this increasing sense of dissatisfaction with the green agenda, which is, however, important to achieve also the equity and efficiency goals of EU cohesion policy. So it's a very complex set of questions. So I think maybe Silvia could start first reflecting on these questions in whichever order you want, of course.
Okay.
And I give you 3 minutes. Okay, thank you.
So that's a big challenge, but I think regarding the fact that the relationship, how cohesion policy can support 2030 agenda and SDGs, I think because basically the two are not so interlinked from the beginning. I think there is a really big value on the activity that the JRC has done and each country or each region are doing now. So now it's mature. The process has not been driving from the beginning, but now giving a lot of framework of analysis. So if we are looking at the data and the visualization that are very, very striking, this can give so much insights on how to give a feedback so in the project cycle and a programming cycle. And to support the post-27th agenda. So I think really there is a lot of data now that can actually do that. And probably also now it's probably ready to also include like maybe an access or something like that in order inside, like to build up probably on what Italy has been doing or to implement within the programming framework this. So, and maybe in the regulation, not an annex dedicated to this in the monitoring system and in programming system, and they can be added in order to be quicker, the relationship of cause and effects and so on. And so regarding to how can the territory benefit from green economy not? So there was a very interesting study that I was looking at. Is green economy helping lagging region or not? It really depends. I think that there's no answer, but in a general answer, because it depends on the precondition, the type of features that a territory has. So some of them yes, some of them no, and this is the challenge. But this kind of a study was actually a little bit pessimistic and correlated, but it really depends on what they have been doing, so it was not really transparent on that. But I think this is definitely something that doesn't have to take in that green is okay or digital is okay by definition. It depends on green what. And it's like circular economy going there. And circular economy has a very high tech, so very divisive activity, which are very highly intensive also in energy. And so it's an entropy. So it doesn't mean that by definition, circular economy is sustainable or decarbonized. Sometimes it's even worse. And so life cycle assessment has to be always there, and territorial impact assessment has to be there, so has to help to understand where we can go and without getting too much into fashions. This content, this is probably the things that I believe the most difficult things to tackle. So environment and sustainable communication. I was studying about the perception. There was a very interesting study done by an Italian consulting company, but really well done. And I was really impressed on how narratives are there. So how public policy has to work. Definitely transition is also not only the objective final, but it's also time. And this is something that sometimes we forget about. And just transition, the idea is tackling there, but just transition depends on the type of academia perspective means different things. So this is something to work on and a big challenge in the future. Thank you. I hope
Thank you very much,
3 minutes.
Silvia. Iraklis, do you have something to add? I'm sure you do.
Well, yeah. Thanks a lot. The questions were very elaborated, so I was taken a little bit by surprise because I had to take notes and really think through. So I will focus on some things that I noted down. Sonia mentioned this thing on the convergence of the cohesion policy in the Agenda 2030. And I was thinking that we have here a core, let's say, connection between the two, basically in the fact that they share these they share the goals of fostering the sustainable development, reducing inequalities, ensuring balanced growth, and so on. That's obviously where the two converge. But I would like to mention also two other things that came in mind. First of all, the territorial approach. We know that the cohesion policy adopts this place-based approach with a very sort of tailored funding on regional projects, right? And then exactly as I was saying on the SDGs, there is this encouragement also by the UN Secretary General lately on the localization, localized implementation to address these challenges. And then there's another thing where the two converge, which in my mind is on this broadly speaking, monitoring and implementation. That is, we know that the cohesion policy has some sort of, not some sort, but a rather well-established monitoring mechanism for the regional level with indicators that regions need to use. And at the same time, the JRC, among other institutions, are the ones that also publish indicators required to monitor the SDGs at the regional level. So I see another level of convergence there. In summary, I noted down the goals for sustainable development, the monitoring and implementation, and this territorial approach. Then there's a thing that I wanted to mention on the, Sonia was saying, how can cohesion policy drive the Agenda 2030 objectives? And the first thing that comes to mind for me is, well, by mobilizing the financial resources. And that is the cohesion funds, we know that are directly invested in certain projects. And it would be very, very interesting. To an extent, this is being done already at the policy level, but it would be very interesting to see how this also reflects on the project level, on focusing these investments, on the regions, on the territories that are most in need, but also on addressing the SDGs that are most, let's say, relevant for the challenges. I here just list SDG 1 on poverty, SDG 10 on the reduced inequality, SDG 9 on innovation, industry, and so on. Just a very quick reaction on the comments. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Iraklis. So again, I think it's only right to give the floor to Mara to react to the questions. And I also wanted to raise again the question raised from one of our participants, which is about the extent of participation, bottom up from communities, from civil society. And I know that the Italian experience has been particularly rich in that regard. So if you could also answer that question, it would be great. Thank you, Mara.
Thanks to you, Laura. I will try, and I will start from that one, linking with the Sébastien, question about the discontent. We are experiencing, at least when we participate to the UN seminars and sessions, there is a huge challenge in terms of institutional trust. Which means that we are all experiencing, independently from our field of policy, and the need to change something in the way we approach both the policy making and the assessment. And this also deals, and I come to the question on how we dialogue with the stakeholders and with the right holders as our main partners from the National Forum for Sustainable Development always remember us. And it's not simple, because we are working, we as the Office for the Sustainable Development in the Ministry of Environment deal with a very holistic framework. So they call for holistic questions and answers. And we are lacking institutional mechanisms able to give holistic answers, or collaborative answers, or satisfactory answers from different departments and offices in the public administration. And in our experience, we have about 220 organizations in the forum. We have had a huge dialogue with them in delivering the national strategy framework and content. And we made the stakeholder engagement one of the pilots and the vectors for sustainability in the strategy. And we made their voice and position up in the VNR in 2022, but it's not enough. They want us to have a structured and continued dialogue at the institutional level. That's what they want for us. And that's the main difficult thing that we have to deal with, because we need institutional mechanism in able to dialogue with different actors. But on the other side, what we experienced is that we need actors able to engage a dialogue with institutions. And it's not that easy to achieve, because it means coming up from them, from their own stakes, and going to, an interacting and exchanging level, which is not that, they're used to do that, not of them in any case. So to me, this is quite a huge challenge. We are dealing with what Sonia was talking about social polarization. I do really think that it comes and deals with this challenge. On the other side, why do we invest so much in an holistic framework, such a complex holistic framework? Because the intent is to, on one side, to ease the assessment so that they can be much also communicative in terms of public engagement and awareness, and decrease the level of conflict that can come from policy implementation. And in this respect, cohesion policy is quite crucial. That is why we chose it to be our field of trial, because programming and assessing environment mechanism and actors are so well trained and developed in 30 years of experience that it is a perfect field of training for all the other policies if we work on that. What's missing to me is how can we deal with the fact that we have to assess the contribution of each policy area to the objectives. And those sustainability objectives should be taken in account as the shared framework to deal with at all levels, including the EU level, and not just a generic principle. So to avoid coming from the generic mention of 2030 agenda in the first chapter of each of our programming document and going through the assessment of if and how what we're doing deals with implementation of those objectives, to me, is quite crucial, and cohesion policy can really give a good chance to prove it.
Thank you very much, Mara, for your thoughts and for linking again the social aspects and the institutional aspects of these, transition goals and the SDGs, and also for once again reminding everyone that cohesion policy is just one part of the picture. It's probably the most advanced when it comes to implementing the SDGs compared to other policies. But of course, SDGs are, horizontal and apply to all policies, and that's the biggest challenge, of course. Now, of course, time is moving on, so I think it's only right now to give the floor to the remaining three discussants. I'll start with Professor Prezioso. Professor Prezioso, if you're here, if you could turn your camera on, and you have 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. And I would like to focus my observation on 3 points on the basis of not only my academic opinion, but also my personal experience within the recovery and resilience facility, where I develop all the aspects we are discussing by the guideline of Italian Ministry of Infrastructure. First of all, in the past decade, as Silvia highlighted, sustainable development has emerged, we know well, as a pivotal drive of the territorial cohesion, but is really also the vice versa, and as the reports of cohesion are demonstrating. And so this aspect, this link, reinforce the linking between these two dimensions, and a new capacity are emerging, as Mara demonstrated, and also other colleagues, and reinforced the aspect of geographical diversity of our investments. Also, European Commission filled this aspect and include both cohesion and sustainability from 2020 in all directive and regulation. And Green Deal support this aspect. The question is, in front of a crisis, a global crisis, COVID and conflict, the concept of competitiveness in sustainability and cohesion is reduced. And so also if Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal are maintaining their position, declared position, some mechanisms are changed. And the investment in cohesion policy change direction, and the investment in sustainability seems to come back and maintain their theoretical aspect, more the practice we saw in past year. The Letta and Draghi reports are moving in this direction because the productivity, employment, gender is more important than a real sustainable development. The cost of circular economy that change completely the type of economy that we follow in past year are higher to be sustained in this moment. Second point, all these change are not reflected in the planning approach and new design approach to policies, program and project, almost in Italy. And the concept of a new sustainable cohesive paradigm that, for example, the just transition stressed develop seem to be blocked at the moment. And it's the reducing of biodiversity, the resilience of a local community are a second option. So the approach that should be more modular, more flexible in project are reduced. In my experience as research at the moment, I tried to stress the economic and financial aspect in our interpretation to starting from the 55 regulation, a new guideline, to say that the cost-benefit analysis and do not significant harm that also Mara recalled before, by the territorial impact assessment of cohesion can change the methodology to make really sustainability and cohesion. And so the third point, and from the political and geographical economic perspective, is emerging that a new type of tools, but not only tools, but also new methodologies are to be stressed. In Spain, for example, the social aspect are the focus to revisit the planning approach, and the social benefits are now considered as a more important, significant aspect of geographical diversity. And it means that the Europeanization of planning culture in policy design can be implemented by the support of this new taxonomy that is not only a technical question, but also a system to inform territorial and urban agendas. And for this, for example, we introduce the Sustainable Development Goals in the present evaluation ongoing of Italian research to support not only the decision-making process, but also the research and educational system to change their approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So there are a lot of different points here, which I think are also positive in terms of the potential of the new Fit for 55 regulation and guidelines, and the no significant harm for implementing the SDGs in practice, and this concept of Europeanizing some practices towards these aims. So now, Paola, if you could also stick to the 5 minutes, because we're really running short of time, and I would like to leave the room for the speakers to react, and also then to Ida to close the session. So Paola, 5 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Laura. And thank you very much for the organizers, of course, and the great presentations. So I'm Paula Tulpo, and I work as a researcher and university teacher here at the University of Lapland in Rovaniemi in northern Finland. And I was going to share some thoughts about EU's cross-border cooperation and borders and regional development, especially from the northern Finland point of view. So borders have been recognized as a resource for regional development due to their potential for cross-border cooperation and joining resources across the border. And European Union cross-border cooperation is an instrument for regional development in border regions, as it aims to develop cross-border projects between communities across the border in order to promote development, and often including economic, environmental, cultural, and infrastructural aspects. So in 1995, Finland and Sweden joined the European Union, and that enabled EU's cross-border cooperation in the area. Of course, northern countries have several similarities and a long history of cross-border cooperation and interaction, and EU brought one tool to the toolbox in regional development. And so during the programming periods, Finland has been involved in several cross-border cooperation programs and projects, and they have definitely had a role in regional development in Finland. Anssi Paasi and Kai Zimmerbauer have pointed out that national borders consist of administrative, juridical, social, cultural, economic, identity, linguistic, and other layers. And while some may be highly absorbent, others can make borders hard. And Paasi and Zimmerbauer have introduced a concept of penumbral borders, emphasizing that borders are relational and manifested through specific practices. Penumbral borders are selective and activated in context and time. And this became concrete here in the Finnish-Swedish border region during the COVID pandemic. And the border between Finland and Sweden was shut, and practically this, what used to be invisible border, was suddenly closed, and it became very much visible, creating these several hindrances in the border region, where people were used to interact in every field, for example, in twin city of Finnish Tornio and Swedish Haparanda. But the Interreg project, many of the activities had to be, of course, deleted or postponed until the border was open again. Then again, sometimes the regional development and interaction based on Interreg cooperation may be totally closed and for a long time, which is the case in our eastern border, where obviously all kinds of cross-border cooperation with Russia is finished due to the Russian invasion to Ukraine. However, of course, fortunately, these kind of examples are exceptional, and normally cross-border cooperation works as planned. But these are also some examples of forces coming outside the region and outside the system of EU's cross-border cooperation that affect the Interreg-based regional development. And regional development based on cross-border cooperation is really a combination of several and multi-level actors and events, but at the same time, it is an opportunity to share several resources. And if we take a look at the future, globally, we need a cross-border cooperation and sharing resources also in future, maybe in some extent even more than before. For example, environmental issues don't follow national borders, and cross-border cooperation is crucial to deal with them. Here at the Arctic region, trends like global warming create major and unexpected effects. So I wonder how cross-border cooperation could be maybe improved in order to respond to challenges the best possible way in the future, related, for example, environmental issues. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
That was perfect. That was exactly when my timer for the 5 minutes kicked off. So well done. And
Okay.
Last but not least, I would like to ask Federico Martellozzo to give us his thoughts, and then we can have a few minutes of reflections by the speakers.
Hello, everyone. Well, challenging to come after those three very, very interesting presentation, and also the thoughtful elements for for improvement that the discussant preceding me have brought up. So I'll try to say something that hasn't been said, but that makes sense at the same time. And I will bring in my experience actually from a project that we are leading here at the University of Florence with my research group, which is about energy and trying to understand what are the hindering and favoring factors behind renewable energy diffusion in Italy. We are actually using AI on top of classic econometric models to do that. But so while doing that, we actually faced one of the problems that have been so clearly pinpointed by both Cossu and Iraklis Stamos, but also by Silvia Grandi when mentioned how sustainability should always have bear in mind not to bring significant harm, and how it is utterly relevant to have an holistic approach when thinking about sustainable development. Should be framed to synergistically pursue intra-scale positive outcomes, therefore trying to avoid rebound effects. That more or less goes in line with what also Sébastien Bourdin mentioned before. So how can we ensure that all territories can jump right in time and effectively on the wagon of sustainable growth and not leaving anyone behind? How different policies, and so the need for place-based policies, as of course led by Professor Mary Prezioso before me. And in that case, I want to highlight how European Union, especially CP policies of European Union, but also the Green New Deal, have set for a lot of interest for what concern the hard path. So whatever concern the energy transition in terms of innovation and adoption and diffusion of technologies, we reached 200 gigawatts of capacity for photovoltaic in 2022, with just a jump of 40 only in 2022, 40 gigawatts. We have instruments, incentives, and policies aiming for 600 gigawatts of overall installed capacity for photovoltaic in European Union. So we know that European Union has a leading role globally in that issue, although there are still some caveats that remains unaddressed. For example, how to frame that within a circular economic framework. Sorry for the repetition, because if we look instead at the circularity of the economy within that, only 5% of the lithium battery are upcycled nowadays, and the 600 gigawatts that we are hoping for can account only for 30% of current, and I underline current consumption in Europe. While pushing for the hard path, we already seeing evidences of how that can be disruptive in some places. For example, in inner areas in South Tuscany, we see that jumping on the wagon of renewable energy transition is actually replacing and disrupting local agricultural systems, which I don't know how much does that not bring significant harm to local communities and the loss of local capital, both social, economic, and cultural. So we also have to maybe retake, because I think that the interest in that has been diminishing. We have noticed that it's been diminishing over the years. What is the interest for the soft path as well? So building on Amory Lovin's work back in the 70s for what concern the soft path, so changing our behavior. And not everyone can change behavior at the same time, because of course we consume roughly in the most advanced places in the world, but in Europe specifically, 2,000 kilowatts hour per capita per year. So we have somehow to change our behavior, and that not only think and improving our efficiency, but keeping on consuming more and growing our population. I know that this is, of course, a huge challenge, but it's a complex system, requires complex answers. And I think that in that case, the holistic approach that was mentioned before is particularly relevant. How to enable that? Well, I think it's, I'm not ready to answer, but I hope that our common ears can explain and can further deepen on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Federico, again for your thoughts. So I think there are some common threads from all the interventions that we heard, from our discussants, and in particular, there are some challenges still that need to be addressed, which relate to further trade-offs and caveats, particularly with regards to the needs of having institutional infrastructure in place that supports the agenda of the SDGs, but at the same time supporting a cultural shift that enables this behavioral change that Federico was mentioning. So we are getting close to our finishing time. We have 3 minutes, 1 minute each for our speakers to react to these last points by the 3 discussants. And then I'll hand over to Ida Musiałkowska to bring everything to a close. But before I turn over to the speakers, I wanted to say thank you to our discussants, of course, to our excellent speakers. It's been fascinating. I've asked for more questions from the floor. If there are further questions, please do write them down and we'll make sure that we can answer them, okay? Thank you very much. So Silvia, and then in the same order as usual, Iraklis, and then Mara, and then Ida. The floor is directly yours as soon as Mara finishes, okay? Thank you again.
So in 1 minute, I can really I'm not able to answer complex questions and issues, but that has been raised by Professor Prezioso, Paola Tulpo, and Federico. I think a couple of questions. One, it's the things that I really struck me. I was listening to Paola. The 5P models was actually we are struggling a lot on environment, so planet, people, but I think cross-border now is teaching us the reason why peace is also in the models of the United Nations. So this is probably something that in cohesion policy, in the discussion of the new commission with defense and so on, this might be something that has to be taken care more. So probably I would finish here, not to take out time for the other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Silvia. Then very quickly, like quick reaction, also question from my side, because I didn't pose any question and I would like to pose one. So I was thinking that it's clear that the cohesion policy and the SDGs sort of do share the same compass, but it's also quite evident that they don't necessarily follow the same path. So there might be, I echo a little bit what Laura was saying before, that there might be a tension here in the sense that can a one-size-fits-all global framework that is the SDGs really align with more nuanced and locally driven cohesion policy, or do we maybe run the risk of oversimplifying local challenges when we sort of squeeze them into the SDGs indicators? And I'm reflecting on whether there's an opportunity there in this tension by sort of using the power of the cohesion policy, the localized, in a way, if I may say so, power of the cohesion policy to sort of reinterpret the SDGs. In that sense, adapt the global goals to fit the local needs without losing the universal vision. So this is for me the opportunity that lies within the cohesion policy. And having said that, we know that it's not going to be a perfect overlap. Yet we can be quite sure that there will be some sort of creative divergence that then we can use both frameworks to fill in each other's gap. So to turn it into a complementary situation. Thank you very much. Thank you also for the workshop. I really learned a lot. Thank you.
I will directly go through Laura. Yes, also from my side, thank you very much. Just 2 quick points. The first one, general one, dealing with what Federico was saying. I do really think that I was talking before about enabling conditions is something we have to really concentrate on, including behavioral change and institutional change. And this is one of I do think much more than dealing with languages and schemes and tools and technicalities. It's something which is quite crucial now. And we do not have funds nor initiatives directly dealing with that. So the soft path is a bit forgotten, let's say, or quite hidden by much more consistent, high, huge impact funding. So, and on the other side, more specifically about peculiarities, I do really think that we could take this chance to articulate the holistic vision within the territorial dimension, which means listening to territories, and we're really much lacking that. We have experienced a massive season of funding, also dealing with territories, but we're missing a lot the capacity to listen to their needs before saying that they have to stick to an average level we have set for them. So I do really think that we need to work more on that.
Thank you. So I'm just jumping in at the end of our session. And firstly, I'd like to thank all the speakers, organizers, and discussants for this rich discussion. And I'd like also to thank to RSA for their continuous support to our CPNet activities. And I hope that this will be also for the future. And I'm also very happy that we managed to organize the follow-up meeting of the promotion of the book, the EU Cohesion Policy Multidisciplinary Approach, that can be bought from Elgar Publishing, and we have a discount, and we will disseminate the flyer to all who are interested and are not in the possession of the book already. So we'll do it via email. And what I also like to stress is that we are going to continue our activities this year. The first set is planned for Brussels event, which is European Week of Regions and Cities. We have 3 sessions co-organized by RSA Europe, CPNet, and some of the participants of the network. There are 2 of them are in Brussels. One is as well as an accompanying event, local event. So you can just follow the details in the link I just posted on the chat. And we are also planning in-person a webinar in Lisbon at the end of November, beginning of December, but we need to confirm the date with our organizer from Lisbon University. And this is what we are going to announce in the nearest future. And we are also looking for extension of our network. So hopefully we'll be in touch with you. And if you are interested to join us, please contact Sonia and myself just with the email saying that you are interested in contributing to the further development of our activities. So I think that we will for sure can have an opportunity to discuss more and also to use our knowledge in practice, because we are still wishing to cooperate with practitioners as well, and just to have our academic expertise more impactful. So thank you, Laura, for chairing this session. Thank you, Silvia, for organizing and inviting the speakers and discussants, and hope to see you soon, either online or in person. Thank you.